Hello, and welcome to episode 76 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. I'm Patrick Stemp, and I have Michael Ronn here with me, as always. How are you, Michael?
Great, Patrick. How are you today?
Good. And we have author Chris Pourteau joining us tonight. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Great.
Chris.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Nice to meet you, Michael.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Chris is one of the authors of the Tales of the Apocalypse collection that comes out on the 20th. And so, Chris, do you want to maybe just take a minute and you sort of talk a little bit about what, just sort of in general, what kind of genres and authors you read as a starting point?
Sure. Everything from fantasy, Tolkien type fantasy, D&D type fantasy, to Stephen King horror, to John Scalzi science fiction, Glenn Cook interesting science fiction like his mystery series about Gareth P.I., which is just an amazing, interesting. It's like Jim Rockford in a fantasy land. It's just a great series. And actually, in the last couple of years, I've been reading a lot of independent fiction because I've met a lot of writers and I wanted to read their stuff. And so Nick Cole's one of my favorite writers. Jennifer Ellis is one of my favorite writers. So I have a pretty varied smorgasbord of reading eatery that I like.
Okay, cool. And I'm sure we'll touch on some of that later, especially maybe some Scalzi. And so in the meantime, let's do our weekly roundtable, and we'll talk about what we've been reading recently over the past week or so. And Michael, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I queue up my books here. I read two over this week, and the first was Win the Crowd by Steve Cohen. And it's interesting. I'm going to pull up the subtitle. Unlock the Secrets of Charisma and Showmanship. So, Steve Cohen is a magician. My wife and I have been watching Penn and Teller's Fool Us over the last couple of weeks. If you guys have seen that, it's a reality show where a bunch of magicians come on and they try to fool Penn and Teller, and if they do, then they get to headline their act in Las Vegas.
Oh wow!
And, it's pretty cool. And I was looking up.
How often do they manage to fool them?
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds a bit like the Amazing Randy finding somebody that actually, has magic.
Yeah, well, it's like maybe like a 10 to 20% ratio. Most of them don't because Penn and Teller, they know everything as magicians, so they're kind of like seasoned writers, right? There's nothing they haven't seen. So, but it was interesting. So I was looking up some books on magicians and what is it like to be a magician? Because I've been looking up YouTube tricks and seeing how they do stuff. And this book popped up, and what was interesting about it was that it wasn't so much about how to be a magician. It was a magician's approach to social interactions. So he talks about how basically he's a corporate magician. So he doesn't really have a show. I think he might have a show at some hotel, but he made his millions by entertaining corporate executives. So they'd say, okay, fly out here and to Dubai to entertain my folks for 2 or 3 days, and he'd go out there and he'd do it. And he just became very famous by word of mouth, entertaining celebrities and things like that. And he talks about the essential elements that a good magician needs, right? But then he goes even further, and the book is really for people who aren't magicians, right? It's like, well, what can you learn from magicians? And he talks about charisma and how magicians do their tricks and how it's more about the confidence than it is about the actual technical part of it. And I thought it was really interesting. And it was very, very well written, too, which I don't want to say I was surprised, but it read like something, it read like really clean copy. Like you read something like you'd read on Copy Blogger. It was just very, very magnetic. So that's the first book that I read.
And sorry, before you move on, what was the name of that Penn and Teller show again?
Penn and Teller's Fool Us.
Fool Us, okay.
Yeah, it's network-wise, it's on the CW. Boo. But it's also on Hulu, which is where my wife and I have been watching it. So.
Okay.
But really interesting. Like all the magicians on there are kind of top-notch. They're pretty cool. So the second book I read, this ended up popping up in the algorithms, like the books also bought by, and that was Everyday Charisma by Patrick King. And the subtitle on that is Techniques for Mass Appeal, Charm, and Becoming a Social Powerhouse. So Patrick King, he's kind of like the Steve Scott of the social world. Like he's got like a ton of books on social interaction, dating, all that stuff. And it was really short, but it was pretty good. He just talks about charisma and how, the perception is that people are either born with it or they can develop it. But he argues that it's something that you can develop. So nothing really terribly new, but it was interesting to hear how he broke it down and like the different steps you can take to become charismatic and magnetic and a person that people actually want to be around. So not that they don't want to be around you anyway, but you guys know what I mean.
Right.
So that was my week in reading.
Okay. And Chris, how about you? What have you been reading recently?
Well, I finished Nick Cole's The End of the World as We Knew It fairly recently, and I thought it was a really interesting take on the whole zombie apocalypse thing. He describes it in the blurb text as The Notebook meets The Walking Dead, and I kind of see where he comes from with that, because there are different recording what do I want to say? Not venues, but different recording types. Sometimes it's voice recording, sometimes it's written journals, and it's just and it's from different characters' perspectives. So it's really kind of an interesting take on the whole zombie apocalypse thing. And Nick Cole's just an excellent writer, so I could read him. I could listen to him read the encyclopedia probably, and it'd be pretty cool. The other books that I'm reading right now, I'm about halfway through The Martian, and yes, that's Andy Weir's The Martian that everybody else on the planet but me has finished reading. I came to the book really late, obviously, and I read about 2 chapters before I went to see the movie. And I thought that even just having read those couple of chapters, that they really captured the spirit of that book, and Mark Watney's character was just wonderfully done. So I'm really enjoying the book. Probably not as much as the movie. I'm a sci-fi writer and I'm a sci-fi reader, but I'm not the guy who wants to know how the physics works to get the ship from point A to point B. And that's a little heavy in that book. Not that it's done badly or anything at all. It's done really well. But the numbers sometimes bog me down when I'm looking for the story. So that's what I'm reading now. I'm also reading a book called, and I brought my Kindle because I wanted to make sure I got it right, the title right. It's called The Iceman: Confessions of a Mafia Contract Killer by Philip Carlo. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I haven't read it, but that was on my list. That seems really interesting.
And there was an HBO movie made starring Michael Shannon. If you ever watched Boardwalk Empire, Michael Shannon was the FBI agent gone wrong in that show, and he plays. I think he plays the titular or the title character, or the character that's the subject of the book, named Richard Kuklinski, I think is the way you say his name, and he's basically the epitome of a psychopathic mafia killer. And the reason I'm reading that book is I'm actually got a writing project on the horizon, a sci-fi piece that's about a mafia killer at the end of his life. Sort of picture a Clint Eastwood and Gran Torino type guy, but he's developed Alzheimer's, and so the mafia, or the corporate structure, which is really just the mafia with contracts, decides they need to get rid of him because his Alzheimer's makes him dangerous. And so that's essentially the core of the story. And so I want to read about Kuklinski and sort of get some insight into that kind of character. And I'm also reading Alzheimer's, books about Alzheimer's too, to make sure I get all that stuff right. So those are the things that I'm reading right now.
Okay, that all sounds very cool.
Fantastic premise for a story, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool, thank you.
So let's see. The biggest book that I read this week was David Eagleman's The Brain, and the subtitle there, I think, is The Story of You. And this is a book I heard recommended by David Wright, and I think it was sort of his something cool on the self-publishing podcast. And I checked out the sample and immediately bought the book. It's just really, really interesting, sort of neuroscience. The book just really kind of blew me away, and I know it's going to be on my top 10 for the year for sure. Just about how the brain works and how memory works from the time that you're a child, and the different things that can go wrong. it's just a really and it's one of those sort of written for the layman. It's not. It's so he talks a lot about experiments that have been done in the past, experiments that he's done himself. He wrote another book called Incognito, which I think was probably a big seller a few years ago, and so I'm going to check that one out next. But if you want something to just sort of maybe learn a little bit about how you work on the inside, it's a really interesting read. Then I read. I picked this up, and then I noticed that it was on the TBR to be read list on Goodreads. But Michael, I don't know if it was you or somebody else that put it there. I got this. This is Saga.
Oh yeah.
Graphic novel. This is volume 1, so it's like the first 5 or 6 issues of the comic. We walked into Chapters on the weekend, and they had volume 5 sitting on the front table.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bright and colorful, and I picked it up and flipped through it and wondered why they had it on the front table where kids could get easy access to it. But it's it's a little bit adult, but man, is it ever great. I flipped through it in the store and picked up the first 5 volumes, which is all that they've released so far. And so I've read the first one. Like I said, this is the first 5 or 6 issues, and it's a great story. And Michael, have you read it, or it's on your list?
Yeah, that's the one I was raving about.
Okay.
Months ago. Fantastic graphic novel.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, how long did it take you before the story hooked you?
Oh, right away.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. So I mean, it's for anyone who hasn't read it. I mean, it's science fiction, but it's also fantasy. So it takes place in a different. Well, I don't know if it's a different galaxy or not. But
it's like an alternate.
Yeah,
it's strange.
It's angels versus demons. It's magic versus technology. It's good versus evil. It's primarily about these 2 planets that are at war, and their war has kind of spread throughout the universe and taken over, the galaxy. They're fighting this war on basically every planet but their own, and one. Like a guy from one side and a girl from the other side kind of get together. He was a prisoner and she was a guard, and they disappear. So they've got everyone in the galaxy is kind of out to find these 2 for whatever reason, and they've just had a baby, and so they're just trying to get away from this war and find a place to be safe with their baby. And there's assassins coming after them and armies, and it's only 5 or 6 issues in. It's a little hard to tell just how deep it goes, but I have a feeling it gets that there's a lot more to it. So
you
I really
make this story sound so sane. No, seriously, I mean this. Like you summed it up really well, but this is a crazy story. Like it's
true.
I mean, just the visuals. I mean, it's the most surreal thing I've ever read.
Oh yeah, we're not talking about people running around. There's like a Spider Woman.
Yeah,
type.
She's literally a spider with no arms, but like 8 legs and battle axes and swords.
Yeah, so it's really cool. And then. So I read that and really enjoyed it, and that's by Brian K. Vaughan, for anyone who's wondering, and Fiona Staples. And then today I found that he's actually done a new series called We Stand on Guard. And I picked that one up. I actually decided to try that one on my phone, and so I've read the first issue on my phone and then on my tablet, just because the tablet's a little bit bigger. But they've done a really good job of putting these comic books onto the electronic devices. The Kindle has set it up nicely where when you click on, say, like the top frame on the page, it zooms in, and then when you swipe, it just goes to the next frame on that page.
Nice. Very nice.
So I did have a little bit of trouble on the phone on some of the frames where even though the frame was zoomed in, there's a lot going on, and the text was big enough to read, but tiny enough that I kind of had to try hard. But most of them are fine, and certainly on a tablet, it's gorgeous. So I think and so this We Stand on Guard is, again, it's Brian K. Vaughan and Steve. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but Skroce, Skroce, does the art, and it is about a future world where America has attacked Canada. They want our water, And it looks like the story focuses on a small band of rebels or guerrilla soldiers who are, I don't know yet. I've only read one issue, so trying to survive, trying to take back some territory. I'm not sure, but it's another. It's definitely less crazy than Saga. No, like crazy aliens or anything, but there are giant robots and a war, and it looks like it's going to be pretty cool. I'll definitely be checking more of these out on the phone or on the tablet at least, because it's pretty cool.
Sounds very cool. Is it okay to mention a television show on this podcast?
Oh yeah, we talk about that stuff all the time.
All right. The reason I ask, I watched the first episode of Into the Badlands last night.
I've heard about that.
I had it DVR'd, and it reminds me of the Saga story that you're talking about. The way I would describe it is you take the antebellum South, you push it into the future, turn it into a Japanese feudal state, mix in a dash of Enter the Dragon, and I guess that's as good a description as any, and you get basically the setup for it, and it's really I thought the first episode was really pretty cool. Maybe a little bit of Kill Bill. I know that the martial arts specialist that was involved with Kill Bill and was involved with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is the guy behind the martial arts stuff in the show. Anyway, it's really a cool show, and it sounded kind of like the setup for Saga, minus the interplanetary stuff. Make it feudal states, and you've got the same idea.
And I don't want to look it up now because my internet doesn't like to be messed with too much when we're live. But yeah, I was looking up the show on Wikipedia and following the trail, and it turns out that it is like it's based on. It's a story that's been told, I think, in either movie or TV form before, but it's based on an old Japanese, like, I don't know if mythology or it's a story that is hundreds or thousands of years old that's sort of like a core, like one of the big 4 or 5 books of their culture.
Wow. Okay.
And I can't remember what it was called. I would look it up if I didn't think my internet would come to a screeching halt. But if anyone's interested, you can look that up and find out sort of where that show comes from. But obviously they've updated because I know they've got people on motorcycles and stuff.
Yes, exactly.
It's enough. And I don't know that it's clear that when this is happening, right?
It feels like it's some sort of dystopian future. I mean, there's the set piece for the first episode was what looked like a southern plantation, but it was obviously in the present or future, near future. And there are these 5, I think, or 7 baronies that sound a lot like feudal states in Japan, and the banners look like they're from Japan that hang off of the plantation house. It's an interesting mix of these cultural, iconic kinds of things. So, but it's neat. It's a good show so far.
Cool. So that's all of our weeks in reading, and why don't we move on and sort of talk a little more with Chris. And so to start, you are one of the authors of the Tales of the Apocalypse short story collection that's coming out in a couple days, and we've had a few other people on so far from that collection. So your story in that is Unconditional.
Unconditional, yes. In fact, I'm also the editor of the collection. I also clean out the wastebaskets whenever they're full. So my story Unconditional, and I listened to the episode with Stefan Boltz a couple of days ago, and he kind of told the story behind it, so I'll hit the high points. But the long story short of that is he posted a picture on Facebook of his dog Ember sort of looking longingly down a road in the fall, the season of fall, and I saw that on Facebook and instantly saw a Walking Dead story about a dog, because the perspective shot in the photograph, which became the cover for the short story that's on Amazon, it looked like one of those long, lonely, empty roads you always see on The Walking Dead, except there was a dog in the middle of it. And so I asked him if I could use the photo for the cover, and I wrote a story last Christmas and published it in January. And I was kind of a little bit concerned about the story because it's a Walking Dead with the dog in it. You know, it's not from the first person's perspective of the dog, but the camera, the author's camera, so to speak, the director's lens is always focused on the dog, third person. And I was worried because, you know, it's not a happy story. It's a Walking Dead with a dog in it. And so I published it in January, and it's gotten a tremendous response. It's got now 50 reviews, and the lion's share of those are very positive. And I think the long story short of how I was successful with that story is that being a dog lover myself from infancy on, I managed to connect with the reader and touch a chord with them about how I presented the dog and the dog's decision making and the kinds of things that he does when he's looking for his boy, his twin runt, as he's described in the story. And then with the success of the story, I thought, well, why not an anthology and why not other animals besides dogs? And so I brought together the authors that are currently in Tales of the Apocalypse, and there's bears and budgies and bats and wolves and cats and dogs. All kinds of animals in the collection, and the preliminary feedback from readers that are doing looking at advanced reader copies for us has been that it's very positive. They really enjoy the collection, so I'm very proud of it.
That's great. So best of luck with the launch in a couple days.
Thank you.
And of course, we should mention the Pets for Vets.
Absolutely. I knew I wanted to benefit an animal charity of some kind, and I originally thought of like the Humane Society and the ASPCA, something like that, and David Bruns, who's one of the authors in the collection, and I think he's been on the show, and he is a Navy veteran, and he said, well, what about Pets for Vets? And I said, well, what is that? And he introduced me to this national nonprofit, Pets for Vets. They take shelter dogs and match them with military veterans who are suffering from emotional trauma like post-traumatic stress disorder. They train the animals to be sensitive to veterans' needs, to be more comfortable around wheelchairs, for example. If a veteran is having a nightmare, the dog might very politely, as a dog will, wake them up to bring them out of the nightmare. So they train the animals to be special companions to veterans. And I thought, well, that's amazing. That's a great match for the anthology, because the themes that run through the different stories are, by and large, there are some exceptions, but by and large, it's about an animal and the connection that that animal has with a human in the story. And so that just fits so perfectly with what Pets for Vets mission is all about. So we adopted them, so to speak, and we're giving $1 from every book sold, whether it's ebook, paperback, or audiobook, to this organization through the end of the year. And in fact, Todd Barcelo, who is our paperback publisher, and he's also handling the audiobook through audible.com, he's going to go ahead and give 25 cents per copy of those two versions in perpetuity to Pets for Vets. And while 25 cents doesn't sound like a lot, over time it can add up. And so we're going to be donating to them. I'm hoping to give them a big check on January 1st or sometime after the end of the year. That's really become my mission in life, is to give them the biggest check I possibly can. So they've been wonderful to work with. They've posted for us on their Facebook page, and Clarissa Black, who's the founder of Pets for Vets, has gone on podcasts with us and talked about Pets for Vets, and it's just been a great marriage of circumstance, I think, more than anything. They're just a great match for us.
That's great.
That's really awesome.
And I think you mentioned that you've got a copy of the
I do.
That arrived in the mail today?
Yes, it arrived this afternoon. This is the proof copy of the paper. Let me try and draw back some so you can see it. Of the paperback. I was concerned about the cover, because I've had covers from CreateSpace come in and they were darker than I meant them to be. This couldn't be more perfect. I've thumbed through the copy and it looks wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I know you can't probably see it, but it looks great.
Looks fantastic.
So yeah, the cover design, by the way, all of the art, the little badge you see down in the corner of my picture, all of that stuff was done by a graphic artist named Adam Hall, who I would recommend to anyone who wants excellent graphic design at an affordable price. He's great to work with. Hey, Adam, would you do this? Yeah, no problem. Would you do this? Yeah, no problem. He's great to work with.
Great. And so, you've got a lot going on with your writing, clearly, in the writing business. How do you find time to read still?
Oh man, honestly, that's the biggest challenge. I do all this in my spare time. I have a day job that has nothing to do with independent publishing. So I'm doing this in the mornings before the wife gets up, or in the evenings before we have dinner, or on the weekends. But a friend of mine once told me, hell, at least read 15 minutes before you go to sleep at night, and I try to do that every night. And if you do that often enough, you actually make some progress. So that's my main reading time is right before I go to sleep.
And were you always an avid reader? Like when did you you read a lot when you were a
Oh,
child?
oh yeah. I mean, I wish if I could pull my laptop around, I'd show you my bookshelves. But I was a voracious reader of Star Trek novels before they were cool, so to speak, with pocketbooks and all that. I mean, back when Ballantine was doing them, when Alan Dean Foster's Star Trek Logs 1 through 10, which were just the novelizations of the animated series, I read those voraciously. James Blish's Star Trek, where he would take the screenplays and turn them into short stories, or all of that. I was doing that when I was 8, 10, 12 years old. So, and I've been reading ever since. And Stephen King was big in high school and college. Tolkien was big in high school and college. So I have a pretty varied reading palette.
And you mentioned Scalzi, which jumped out at me because I'm a huge fan of his.
Yeah, the Scalzi stuff, the Old Man's War series is what I've read of his and loved it. And I understand they're making a series out of that. Is it a series or a movie?
They're making a TV series out of it, and honestly,
Really?
I heard I think they even had trailers like last year, and since then I haven't heard a thing that it's canceled, still coming out, or So it was going to be a TV show, but I don't know anymore.
Right, it's Sci-Fi Channel, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That's one I think where a TV series makes sense because each book is a different character, right? So, because I've only read book 1 in the series, I just understand book 2 is a totally different.
I think most of the books I didn't read. I forget. It's Zoe's
Tale.
Zoe's Tale. I didn't read that one because I was told that it was basically the same story from a different perspective. So I didn't read that one.
It's the third book from her perspective.
Yeah. But the other ones I think are from the main character's perspective.
Yeah, they all follow the same man.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For some reason, maybe I'm thinking of another series.
Well, then the 5th book is more of like a series of sort of short stories, and I'm trying to remember what that was called. And I believe that another book has come out in the series now, and plus, of course, he's written a whole bunch of short stories in that universe. But Scalzi is definitely one of my favorite authors around here. I actually haven't read Lock-In, his most recent book. Have you read that one?
No, I haven't read that one.
That one was my wife read it and enjoyed it, and I just haven't gotten to it. But that was an interesting one where there's no gender specified in the main character, so the audiobook has 2 narrators, like 2 completely different versions of the book. One with Will Wheaton narrating, and one with a female narrator whose name escapes me. But I think I do have the Will Wheaton narration on my phone. I just haven't listened to it yet. But I believe I went with his version, not because it was Will Wheaton, but because for some reason or another, his version is about an hour and a half shorter than hers.
Huh. Interesting.
So it just means he's a faster reader, I guess.
Yeah.
But
so how was Red Shirts? You must have read Red Shirts, because I haven't read that yet, and obviously with the Star Trek tie-in, it's a big lure for me.
Red Shirts is one. So the way I read Scalzi, the way I feel about Scalzi when I'm reading typically, and I've said this before on the show, is kind of not too sure, maybe a little underwhelmed at the beginning, but by the end of the book, just completely blown away. Mm-hmm. Red Shirts is definitely an extremely bizarre story, and you know what it's about, but for anyone who doesn't, it sort of takes place in a universe where, it's kind of like a Star Trek type universe where the red shirts realize that they are the ones who always die when they go on away missions, right, because their leadership is incompetent. And it ties into sort of a parallel universe, which is our world, where these shows are being written as TV shows, and there's a whole big thing going on there. It's very cool, and did blow me away by the end. I found the same thing with Little Fuzzy.
I haven't read that.
Or Fuzzy Nation, and the reason I'm getting confused with the titles is because H. Beam Piper wrote, I'm going to say Little Fuzzy, years and years and years ago. I mean, you can get it for free. I think it's old enough that I think it's you can get it for free.
Mm-hmm.
And then he sort of rewrote it as Fuzzy Nation, and I may have that backwards, but I think I have it right. Where he took that story and kind of reworked it and built on it, and it was a fantastic read as well. Again, it was another one where not too sure at the beginning, seemed like just kind of your basic everyday run-of-the-mill science fiction, but by the end of it, he really kind of blew it, brought it all home. It was a great story.
Do you guys read Glenn Cook at all?
I don't think I have.
No, he's famous for the Black Company books, and he wrote a series of books. I think there are probably up to 15 or 16 of them now, about a character named Garrett, who it's in fact I think the first collection of 3 books is called Garrett P.I. And it's basically a Jim Rockford character with writing like she walked in the door and her legs went all the way up to her hips, that kind of thing. But it's set in a fantasy world with ogres and vampires and trolls and elves, and it's just a really, really interesting series. I recommend it if you're a Jim Rockford fan at all and you like fantasy. I recommend that series.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I wrote down that name when you said it earlier because it rung a bell, but wasn't sure what he had written. And so you're a Stephen King fan as well?
I am.
What's your favorite King novel?
Honestly, okay, so I'm going to date myself, but my favorite King novel is still Salem's Lot, and I know it's old, and it's but that's the one that grabbed me the first time, and it's kind of like your first love, or at 45 years old, you still like the music you liked in 8th grade. It's kind of like that. I just thought it was a fantastic book, and the miniseries scared the bejesus out of me. So with David Soul of Starsky and Hutch fame, so I really like that book.
I think Salem's Lot is a lot of people's favorite King book.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that from other people as well, and I think when I think back on Stephen King, for me, the one I keep coming to is actually one of his short stories, The Long Walk. Which,
oh yeah.
I was talking to I think it was John Monk a few weeks ago because I think he just read it, and I think we were both saying, like, why isn't this a movie? In today's day and age, if you've read The Long Walk, I mean, it is the perfect story to be turned into a YA or re-released as a novella for the YA crowd and turned into a movie, and they'd make $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Although Stephen King doesn't tend to do well on the big or the little screen.
Right.
Really? But that one, I think they could do something with it.
Well, and I think my opinion on that is because King does such a great job of letting the reader's imagination fill in the blanks, and by its nature, a visual medium and a director have to do that for you. Maybe they can suggest something in a corner behind the shadows or whatever, but he does such a good job of teasing your own fears out of the back of your head that a movie doesn't quite do that as well, and I think maybe that's why he suffers there.
Mm-hmm. And before I forget, Michael, are you there?
I'm here. Sorry.
I wasn't sure if you just blacked out the camera.
Trying to maneuver around this crying baby in the background. Yeah.
You had mentioned before we started that you actually had a couple of news items to go over this week.
Oh yeah. Let me see here. The first one, and I didn't get a chance to delve that deeply into it, but basically the headline was that a bunch of researchers got together and are recommending that smartphones have a color grade shift down in the evenings in order to prevent sleep disorders. So if any of you guys have been, or people listening have been following the smartphone debacle, right? They recommend that you turn your phone off or that you not use your phone or any kind of device at least 30 minutes before bed, because apparently it's the blue light that's in these devices now that are what cause sleep disorders. And so when you're exposed to that blue light before you go to bed, it basically it releases some kind of endorphin, if I remember correctly, that basically stops you from going into deep sleep or REM sleep at night. And so a bunch of researchers have kind of taken that into light, and apparently are recommending that smartphones have some sort of a color shift in the screen to reduce the amount of blue light that you're exposed to before bed, so that will apparently reduce your chances of being affected by these disorders. So,
no, but it's not specifically smartphones, right?
From what I saw, it said smartphones.
But because I have heard, and it may be specifically they're talking about smartphones, but I have heard, I mean, that's why you're not supposed to have the TV in the bedroom, turn the laptop off. It's any kind of sort of artificial light like that kind of tricks your body into thinking that it's still daytime.
Well, that explains a lot for me. I've got a TV in the bedroom. I've got a laptop in the bedroom. I play Star Trek Wrath of Gems before I go to sleep. Wow.
Oh, and when you were talking about the...
They wrote that article for you, Vince.
Yeah, I know, man. It was aimed at me.
It's funny when you were talking about the Star Trek books earlier. I had forgotten about these, but I remember having a series of books that were the Star Trek like episodes in book form, but they were actually just like the actual images from the TV show with like the speech bubbles.
If you wait 1 second, I have every single photo novel.
Oh, do you?
I'm serious. Hang on a second. I've got to find them now. Oh, yep. Hang on a second. Y'all keep talking. I'll be right back.
He's got them right there on the shelf.
Actually, some bossa nova music.
They're up a level, but I'm going to get them.
That's hilarious. Those are I remember having those when I was a kid. It's a kind of thing. I remember them. There's no way I still have them. I've over the years.
I've
been through the boxes. Yeah, I've been through those books in the basement enough times to know that they're not anywhere in this house. So.
Okay, let me just show you my little collection here. That's not one of them. Sorry about the bump there. Okay, there they are.
Nice.
The first one on the left is Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
And those are the photo novels?
Yeah, here's an example. Get this to the camera so you can see it.
Yeah, I remember those.
Wow. And for our audio listeners, he's showing us the photo books.
With the
speech bubbles, yeah, they take them right out of the TV show.
Okay. Every single one of them. Thank you very much.
That's awesome.
Are those worth anything now? Was I an idiot for letting them go?
I have no idea. I have no idea, but I refuse to throw them away. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's old. That's like 1970s. It's got to be.
Yeah.
Or early 80s.
Back.
Cool.
Awesome. I had another news item real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Barnes & Noble launched an audiobook service or audiobook feature functionality to their Nook platform. So Barnes & Noble, apparently they've had it for a while, but they just didn't advertise it, but apparently they're now starting to put a push behind it. And so it's an audiobook app for iPhone and iPad, and then their Nook devices and Nook software. And it's very similar to Audible in the sense that they've got a catalog of 60,000 titles. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like,
what title? Like, are they titles that are already through ACX on?
No, they can't. But for the most part, unless they're ACX non-exclusives, they can't be.
So I wonder what that library looks like.
Yeah, out of all the companies to do this, I just wonder why it was Barnes & Noble, right? Like we keep saying, Audible needs a competitor. Audible needs a competitor. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if Barnes & Noble's the one to do it. Number one, there's the Audible exclusive problem, right? That all the authors are going through Audible. Audible sewed up the market. It's a 7-year exclusivity agreement. So
we just signed one of those for Tales of the Apocalypse. We just signed that exact agreement. Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't you, right? Because there's no other. I mean, there are no other competitors. I mean, it's not like KP Select, right? So, I don't know. I think it's a good thing, right? I mean, I think we need a competitor in the audiobook space. I just hope that they'll open it up to indies so that we can get.
If we were going to see a competitor in the Audible space, I'd like to see Kobo get in there, just because. So maybe us Canadians can have access to that stuff, because we still ACX still isn't available in Canada. So Barnes and Noble doing this doesn't help us out at all.
No, it just doesn't make any sense.
But the other, I don't know why more authors don't just. I mean, I do know why. I was going to say. They should be selling direct just off their website. I mean, people can listen to MP3s on their phones very easily. It's easier to sideload audio than it is an ebook, you can sell that stuff. You could sell through Gumroad, through your website, keep all the money for yourself. And of course, the reason people don't do it, and the reason, like, you know, why they go through Audible is because of the marketplace. That's where people are when they're looking to buy a book. So you can only really,
and your royalties are cut in half if you go non-exclusive. You know, Audible offers a flat 40% fee if you're exclusive, plus royalty shares.
You could have it recorded yourself and keep 95% of the money by selling it through Gumroad, just as a storefront.
Oh, absolutely, you could, but that's
But you have to find your own
problem.
audience. Yeah,
you have to find your own audience,
you have to find your own audience on Audible too, right?
Yeah.
Right.
As an indie, right? You've got a few books up on Audible. Are they flying off the shelves?
Me, this is actually my first book on Audible, so you know, we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping that it'll be a popular anthology on Audible. So.
And I think you guys on Tales also have, you know, you've got some pretty big names there as well, like Edward W. Robertson, right?
Yeah, Michael Bunker, Edward W. Robertson, Deidre Gould, David Adams, who's popular in Australia. So yeah, we've got some big names on there, and hopefully we'll move some books that way and give some of that money to Pets for Vets.
Yeah, and each of you will kind of be bringing your own audiences to the table, which is great for all of you. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, one of the things I did in the book and in the collection, and I'll keep this short, but 7 of the 14 short stories are written in fan-loved worlds. So, like David Adams' Symphony of War, for example, his short story is set in that world. Edward W. Robertson's Breakers, his short story is set in that world, and so hopefully that'll bring some readers in for all of the other authors as well.
That's cool. So we're coming up on, I don't know how long, but it's coming up on the end, I think. Chris, where is the best place for people to find you online?
My website is, and I'll spell my last name for you, it's chrispourteau.thirdscribe.com, and the last name is spelled POURTEAU.thirdscribe.com, chrispourteau.thirdscribe.com. And I would invite everybody that's listening, and you guys, and at the end, Patrick, I'll give you the link. Come out to the launch party on Friday afternoon. We'll have a launch party that's going to last, I don't know, 6-8 hours. And the whole purpose for that is to bring readers and writers together. The writers will be giving away free books and stuff, and so it's just for everybody to get together and have a good time. We're not trying to sell a bunch of books, because you don't do that at a launch party. You just get together and have fun. So I'll give you the link for that after the show.
And that's on Facebook?
Yes, I'm sorry, it is on Facebook.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me very much. Michael, it was great to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for being on, Chris.
And for all of our listeners and viewers, Michael will be on vacation next week for Thanksgiving holidays. And so we will have to figure out what to do about that between now and then. So we will we will talk to you next week. You guys have a great week, and thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you guys soon.
All right,
Take
bye
care,
everybody.
Guys.